So we've discussed founders and starting a business. What I want to talk about now is risk and pivoting, because I think as a person who's involved in late payment management and debt collection and debt recovery, I find risk to be an interesting topic, and how mostly men, again, I have to say this, guys, sorry, it's you might be offended, but mostly guys who seem to be, I've had a few cases where a lady's come to me because her husband has basically signed documents in her name in order to basically approve a loan which she knows nothing about. And then it gets to a stage where what happens is that obviously the bank or the building society or the lender want her out. But she's thinking, this has got nothing to do with me. And it causes breakups, it causes family fallouts, all kinds of stuff. Is it because men tend to look at risk differently from women? Is that something that you found in the mentoring that you've done?
Yes. That was a short answer. I would say absolutely that women tend to have a different approach. So I would say generally and again, we can only ever talk in generalities.
Of course.
Generally, women, I would say, have a lower tolerance, a lower desire to accept higher levels of risk. So it doesn't mean that they won't do what the man might do. It means they would maybe think about it in more detail, do it in a different way, put in different safeguards, do it more slowly. So they may well be achieving the same things, but in a probably a better thought out way, rather than doing it in perhaps a quicker, more sporadic, more ad hoc, whatever way. So I think I would totally agree with you. And even to the extent when you look internationally, so the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development was one of the very first to look at micro loans in emerging economies. And they were lending literally $25 to minute businesses in emerging economies, let's say to buy flowers for a flower stall. And then grow the business gradually from there. And they found very much that lending to women was a far safer proposition than lending to men, because the women took it as a much bigger responsibility and were sort of, I guess, less prepared to fail than men. So I would say there is definitely a personality difference between the two sexes.
The Cashflow show, coming to you from the city of London, real people, real business, real talk.
In the last couple of years, pivoting has been a situation that's come up. How important is it to be aware of pivoting your business?
I think pivoting is simply an extreme form of adapting. And any business has to constantly be aware of its surroundings, whether it's competition or whether it's the way that the views and products and services are sort of trending around them, what's happening, where the future opportunities might be, and need to adapt to take all of that into consideration. So sometimes those events might be happening slowly, other times they may be happening more quickly, and that means how quickly you need to adapt is either more slowly or more quickly. And then occasionally you come across with something much more seismic, like very obviously the pandemic and lockdown and everything else. And just adapting might not be sufficient. It may be that you need to totally reinvent where you are and what you do and how you go about it in order to survive.
Yeah.
So I always take the view that a business is like an aircraft. If it's not moving forward, it will fall out of the sky. And
Yes.
that means you have to be adapting. If you're not moving forward, then effectively you're moving backwards, because your competition will be moving forward. If, as I say, something bigger happens, or either in the world in general or in your particular market, or you come across a better opportunity, then it's can be necessary, or simply you can decide to pivot. And that is simply taking really a very different role forward. So the biggest example that comes immediately to mind is Nokia.
Yes.
So Nokia has been in forestry. It was one of the world's largest rubber producers, producing Wellington boots and car tires and such things. It then became the world's best-known mobile phone producer, and until it got caught out and didn't adapt quickly enough with smartphones. And now everybody tends to think that Nokia has effectively disappeared, but it is actually behind pretty much every sat-nav that is built into pretty much every car. So they've changed their technology yet again, and so they seem to be a company that is very focused on pivoting. So totally different things, and that's quite a trick to pull off, because you've got totally different sectors, markets, experience. So adapting is easy, pivoting is more difficult. But in certain times, it can be necessary. And certainly during lockdown, you saw everybody pretty much having to adapt in one way or another, and others having to pivot. But what I would say with adapting is you come out after lockdown, and most of the businesses that had to pivot have decided that some of the things they had to do to survive actually worked pretty well. And so the better companies have now kept some of what they were doing pre-pandemic, kept some of what they were doing during pandemic, and they've actually now got the best of the two. And they're actually more successful than they ever would have been if they hadn't had to adapt big time, or indeed pivot during that time. So again, getting forced into doing something isn't necessarily a bad situation. It just forces your hand to make you think better and how to go about doing something.
Yes, very much so. One of the things I noticed on your website is you've got an area where you talk about doing pitch decks. Now, I've never used a pitch deck, and up until now, I never had any need to use one. But I'm totally obsessed with them. I don't know what it is, what's wrong with me. Maybe I just don't get out much. But, you know, I'm totally obsessed with, and I spend my time online looking at not at tractors, but at pitch decks. So what's interesting for me is that why have certain pitch decks achieved such mythical status?
You know, there isn't a perfect pitch deck. It depends what you're trying to do and who you're trying to do it with, what your product or service is, all those usual variables. But typically a pitch deck would be used if you're trying to raise finance, and you need to bear certain things in mind. The best way to look at it is a preview. It is a trailer for an upcoming blockbuster movie. You need to make people want to know more. And that's all the pitch deck is. It's going to be 15, 18 slides, something like that. You haven't got much space. You're not going to be able to get too much information in it. All you're trying to do is to get somebody to think, wow, that looks an interesting company. I want to know more. So that's the first part. And then you need to run through what is the problem, what is the solution, why you are the people to provide that solution, who are you, what is the team. You need an advisory board. If you're looking at raising finance, how much and what that money is going to be spent on, and a brief summary of the financials, projections, more typically, turnover, gross profit, net profit, just headline sort of numbers, and then obviously a contact page. But all of that needs to be put in a visual way, something that grabs your imagination. When I'm reviewing or working with businesses on pitch decks, the one thing I get fed up myself hearing is too wordy. Don't try and make it a written document. It is a visual document. I'm told that some of the big VCs will spend 3 seconds a slide looking at a pitch deck. And you need to grab their imagination. So it needs to be sort of headlines and brief information and graphics and all of that sort of thing. So clearly, if you've caught their imagination with the headlines, then they're going to read the little paragraph underneath it, and they'll spend more than 3 seconds. But if you just put up a whole bunch of words, as you would expect to see in a business plan, they're just going to give up after a few pages, and that's the end of it. So visually attractive, brief summary. It is purely trying to grab their imagination, but it needs to be your personality. Your business, at the end of the day, is about you as an individual, and your personality needs to shine through. Because any investor investing in an early stage business, it is very much about you as the founder or the founding team, because a good founder and founding team will be able to not quite turn any business into a good business, but you might have the best business in the world, but if you've got the wrong team behind it, then it's never going to go anywhere anyway. So it's really important to remember that it's your story, and you've got to present it as such, and your personality has got to shine through. And that's true not just in the written deck itself, but also if you're presenting that deck, whether virtually or live. So they're the sort of the real big things that I would say. And not too long, as I said, 15 to 18 pages is the sort of typical size. And it doesn't have to be, so that's generally referred to as a pitch deck, but you can have a product deck.
Okay.
So you can have something that simply tells you about the business rather than just raising finance. But again, make sure, I've seen too many where you're on page 8 and you still don't know what the business does. So as I say, it runs through what's the problem, what's the solution, why our solution. And so they tend to run through in a certain sort of order, but you need to get across who are you and what are you doing, because otherwise, again, it's too easy to, as I say, for the reader to lose interest too early, and you won't get a second chance.